Hello and welcome to the History of Video Games podcast. My name is Ben and joining with me this week and every week is Wes. How are you, Wes?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Ben?
Doing good. What you been playing, Wes?
Well, as I mentioned last episode in the Video Game Adventures of Wesley, right now I have a Switch and I'm full fanboy mode on that. Me and my brother got Breath of the Wild, which of course was one of the selling points when we were going for the Switch.
Right.
And I mean, I'm pretty susceptible to hype, so I don't know if you can take this as a biased opinion, but it definitely lives up to the hype, in my opinion.
Nice.
Super good. The open world, I guess it depends whether that's your thing or not. Some people might like a bit more of all of them were fairly open world anyway, but this is more in the modern open world sense where there's like collectibles and quest kind of stuff.
Okay.
But it's good. It's different enough that keeps you interested. Some weird, not intuitive stuff. Like there's cooking and recipes, but there's no recipe book, and you have to just like physically drop all the stuff into a cooking pot from your inventory to cook it.
Okay.
But other than that, it's pretty fluid. I'm still loving the controller that they have where you put the two Joy-Cons together to make a full controller. And yeah, I can tell I'm going to spend between that and Let's Go Pikachu many hours beating both those games.
Have you been playing it mainly in like handheld mode or on the big TV?
Mostly on the big TV. I've been doing Let's Go Pikachu on handheld, but I actually haven't played Zelda on it yet.
Okay, cool.
So we'll see. It's a big enough screen. I think it should be pretty good, but for Zelda, I think the experience probably is definitely better on the TV.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard only really good things about Zelda other than I think I remember hearing that people complained about the durability on items. Have you encountered anything like that?
It's weird. Right now, I don't have a problem with it. I'm just kind of like, in my head, have to get over the mentality of like, always save all these weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, I feel like I'm going to enjoy the game a lot more if I'm just like, oh, I got something good. I'm going to use it right now till it breaks, and then I'll use whatever else I find.
Right.
Because usually I'm a hoarder in open world games, and it's just like,
I feel like I'm the same.
Yeah, I was thinking when I was playing this, man, I don't know if Ben, this might be one of the ones you'd pass on because it's such an open world that you'd spend so much time just trying to complete everything.
I mean, we can just look back to Assassin's Creed and realize that I've not completed like half the game yet. So I think you're right. Well, I feel like that game's not as bad as Assassin's Creed though, right? It doesn't look as bad. I mean, I guess I haven't seen like pictures of the map yet, but
yeah. I mean, I don't think I don't know. I'm just past like the intro area now, so I'm not super far. And I don't know to like what extent there's side quests, but there are like literal Assassin's Creed towers where you climb up to the top and then you get the map for that area. So,
well, if the big thing is, can you buy a map that shows all the chests on the map? Because that's like the worst. That literally made the map. I couldn't like read it because of how many icons were on it. So,
yikes! I wonder if that is a thing. Yeah, hopefully it's not that cluttered. I'm sure this is a cleaner display, and I'm already getting to the point where I'm realizing all these chests could have something great, but they could also have 5 arrows. So I'm not going to sweat it if I miss a chest.
Yeah, the worst thing in Assassin's Creed is like I'm basically towards the end game now, so I'm only really looking to buy like the best weapons in the game, which are like, I want to say they're around like 200,000 francs or whatever. I don't know the currency, but sometimes you open up a chest and it's like 200 and you're like, that wasn't worth my time. Like, I need 200,000. So it's like nothing.
Yikes.
Yeah. But I'm like, at least it was removed from my mini map, so that's good.
That's worth your time for the peace of mind and not having that clutter on the map.
Yeah.
So what about you? Is that what you've been playing recently or anything else?
Nah, I haven't. I've still been playing a little bit of RuneScape.
Nice.
As my main. And I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but my like hardcore guy died, right? And I created a new one. So I've got now 3 characters and only 2 I'm going to ever play probably. But my new hardcore guy and the one that died, I'm playing both at the same time. So I got 2 windows open. And I've never really done that with RuneScape before, but it's actually like pretty enjoyable because it's a very slow game. So one guy will just be like, you click an iron mine or whatever, and it takes like a minute to respawn the ore spawn thing. So you're just sitting there, and while you're just sitting there, I'm over at my other one killing chickens or whatever. So I decided to just, for my hardcore guy who once he dies, my high score gets reset and the account is dead. I decided for him, instead of like training anything for fun like I usually do at the beginning, I'm just gonna go full combat so that hopefully nothing bad happens. He'll be prepared. He's already like stronger than my first character. My first character has like 50 fishing, and this guy's got 0, so that's a couple hours of catching up to do.
Strong guy, but no skills.
That's right.
And that's interesting. I've never got into that type of gameplay, but I've heard people talking about that. How it's just like multiple windows, and it's almost like StarCraft level macro and micro.
No, it's not that. It's pretty. If I need to, I just like can focus on the one, and for the most part, I never really have to pay attention to both.
I gotcha. Okay.
You know, especially because my hardcore character is never in a situation where he could possibly die. Like I have to make sure of that. So yeah, RuneScape. It's pretty fun. I'm still like they need to do a better job as a company, but I like the game. So what are you gonna do?
I mean, yeah, you're still playing, so that's how they get you.
The problem is, how much money do I put into the characters? Because like, if my hardcore guy, if I put money into him, which I'm gonna hopefully eventually do, I kind of don't want to put money into the other guy.
That's true.
So I'm gonna have to figure this out. But
that might be a personal question, Ben. I don't know if I can answer that one for you.
How badly do I feel about myself is the answer. But yeah, I've been doing that. I haven't been playing very many games. I've been doing a lot of research for our next couple episodes.
Oh yeah, and I've started to see the fruits of that.
Yeah, this is our last 1973 episode. So like 1974 has to be done, which means like every single 1974 episode that we're going to have has to be done like now.
Right.
Which is going to be quite a few. So I've been doing a lot of that. I've been watching a lot of Designated Survivor on Netflix. I don't know if you heard of this.
Oh, is that Kiefer Sutherland?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never really watched it, but I know what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. I've basically yesterday I was like watching so much that my neck kind of got like started to hurt from laying down so much, and so I literally was like pacing my apartment, holding my iPad in front of me to watch. I was like, "This is what addiction looks like."
Yeah, dude, I had a similar moment yesterday. We had originally talked about recording the podcast yesterday, but switched off, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll play 6 hours of Pokemon Let's Go on the Switch.
Yeah.
And I started to get a pain in my wrist because you can use the motion controls to catch the Pokemon.
Oh no.
And I was just like, what kind of monster have I become?
I know.
Switched it over to my left hand and kept playing.
And the worst part was I was trying to like finish season 1 because I was like, a couple episodes away, and I was like, I'll just, binge it out and finish it.
Right.
And then season 1 ends with a massive cliffhanger, and season 2 is already out. And I was like, oh my God. So
of course.
I know. I was like, you did me dirty.
Did you cave?
I started season 2, yeah. But I'm only like 2 episodes in.
Okay, yeah. You gotta find the nice balance between binging and actually like getting a worthwhile experience out of watching a show.
Yeah. The show's good. It's not like the best show of all time, but every now and then, like, someone will do a classic, like, bad guy runs into a cornered area, and it's like, I guess I'll go in by myself. It's like, what are you doing?
There's got to be some of that.
Yeah. But, it's a good time.
Sounds like it, yeah.
All right. Well, we should probably move into games. History games. Before we move into the timeline this week, I briefly just want to mention like an update with Magnavox as our special topic. There's not too much to talk about, but Magnavox gets bought up in 1973, 1974, so there you are no more.
All right, see you later, Magnavox.
Yeah, they're going to get bought up by a company called Philips Electronics, who does use the Magnavox name for the next couple of years on different, video game sort of products, but they're not independent anymore, and I also wanted to make sure that Ralph Baer was still around because he's the guy who made the Odyssey, and he is going to continue making games for Philips for some time. So it's not a big deal, but I think it might help describe the end of the Odyssey, which we're going to be talking about today, because after today's episode, the Odyssey will not make any more games in its entire lifetime. So the end of the first home console has come.
Wow. Yeah. Very dramatic.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, part of the reason for that was obviously like sales, because we already talked about that it didn't sell like great. But I think the other part of that is they're, dealing with this big merger, and I'm sure it was very, hectic for some time over there. So
right. And probably the Philips Electronics buying them up, if they're not seeing the profit they're looking for in that Odyssey line, they're just going to be like, all right,
yeah,
done with that.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to come out with another version of the Odyssey, I think in 75, but they made changes to it to probably try to make it more profitable. So I can understand why the original Odyssey will no longer be a priority.
Yeah, as we'll see in the timeline, comparing some of the Odyssey games to some of the arcade cabinet games that are coming out at the same time, it's getting a little bit past its relevance, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, you gotta imagine when the Odyssey first came out, like it came out before Pong. It came out before like all these games that we've been talking about. And, 1973 and 74 is just a different landscape and, video gaming industry, period, after Pong came out. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Without any further ado, you think we should move on into the timeline?
I think we shall.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And without any further ado, let's get straight into our timeline. Why don't you take it away, Ben?
Thank you, Wes. So the first game we have here is Leader by Midway, which came out in 1973. This is kind of like Elimination that I played from last episode, but it has a variant where one player can play the top and bottom parts of the screen, and the other player can play like the left and right, which I thought was pretty interesting. I couldn't find any sort of emulation on this game, so we couldn't play it. It is a version of another game that we're going to talk about in probably next episode, so we'll probably talk about it a little bit more then. But yeah, another kind of Pong clone, but all four edges of the screen are like places where the ball could run off and give you a point, and one person's the top, bottom, one person's left, right. So it does also have 4-player version with each person being a side. So
okay,
just like Elimination.
Cool. And then the next one that we have on our honorable mentions are two different games that were sort of clones of Space Race, the game that Ben had played last episode, I think, right? Or no?
I think two ago.
Oh man, I'm getting really lost in this. But these two, it's a sort of Frogger-like game. One was Astro Race by Taishio in, oh no, do I know my months? November of 1973. And the other was Asteroid, but not Asteroids. And this one was by Midway. And then next up, we have the first game that I got to play. And this one is going to be a sort of Pong clone. Well, it's a pretty much a Pong clone called Hockey by Ramtech. And Hockey came out in fall of 1973. Just a brief history of Ramtech. They actually started out by making computers and graphical displays for computers, but then quickly diversified to try and make some games as well. And there was a report that they got the idea for a lot of their games when some of the employees kept going up and playing Pong day after day to kind of learn how Pong was made. And the first thing that they made that we mentioned in one of the previous episodes was Volley, which was a direct Pong clone. But this game takes a slight difference in Pong to reimagine it and make it look like it's hockey that you're playing. So for this game, each player controls 3 bars or paddles. They all move together at the same time, and 2 of them are on the opponent's side of the rink, and then one of them is on your side, and it's basically the goalie for the hockey net. It's pretty much, other than that, just exactly the same as Pong. You have to get it into the other player's goal. There's a score at the top of the screen that keeps track, and I think it's the best of 15 points is the whoever wins that. And one interesting thing I noticed. Oh well, I misspoke. I didn't get to play emulator for this one, but I did get to watch a video of the original cabinet and someone playing that to get an idea of how this one played. And it looked like the puck had variable speeds, and I'm not too sure if that was dependent on how it was hit, or like how fast you were moving your paddle or the direction that it was hit, or if it was just random. But it was interesting to note that the ball wasn't always moving at the same pace across the screen.
Yeah, and that's a feature that we're going to see in more and more games coming up here. So it probably makes the game feel a little bit faster and more impactful, I guess.
Yeah, and I'd almost, even if it is random, kind of more realistic too, I guess, because there's a level of unpredictability to what's going to happen when you hit it. Kind of makes it more interesting and keeps you more engaged.
Yeah.
But all that being said, when I was kind of looking over this, I really don't think it had too much to distinguish it from being just another Pong clone. The redesigned rink in the background was kind of cool, and it was nice that it had the 3 paddles. So you had a lot of 3 different ways that you could hit the ball back at the opposing player. But other than that, it did kind of seem just like Pong.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was rating it for the graphics, I gave it a 1 out of 10. One of my favorite things about it is just that it has a score on the screen. There's some things that still at this time weren't showing you the score, mainly for the home system like the Odyssey. But happy that this one at least had that. And the rink was pretty nice, but nothing special. So just a 1 out of 10 for that.
Mm-hmm.
For sound, I also gave it a 1 out of 10. It does have those classic arcade beeps, boops, and buzzes when it goes flying into the enemy goal.
Oh, yeah.
And then for gameplay, I gave this one a 2 out of 10. I think it's interesting because it is slightly more complex than Pong. It's not just those 2 moving parts. You have a lot of different moving parts that can hit the ball back and forth, but other than that, not that different. But it did get me thinking. I wonder if even those small changes at the time would have been exciting to people who are really into arcade games. Like to us right now, it seems like, this is basically exactly the same thing. But I'd be curious to know if somebody who had really been following them was super excited about this huge innovation of 2 more paddles on the screen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel
it's hard to say because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of, or at least that me and you could find a lot of like firsthand impressions of what people were thinking as these arcade cabinets were coming out.
Right. My guess would be like they just think of it like it's another ball and paddle game. I don't think they probably thought it was that innovative.
That's true. Yeah, and it seemed like, I mean, especially because some of them are hard to research, and it doesn't seem like they had a lot of sales. That kind of reflects that.
Yeah, and I should also mention the electromechanical games market at this time was like pretty advanced. I mean, there was a lot of like use of projectors. So you would be playing like a racing video game or whatever, and there'd be a projector of like a movie of a racetrack, and you're just like pretending like you're the one in there, So like, okay. I'm kind of amazed at how well Pong sold in that saturated market, but it's hard for me to say that like hockey would be that much of a distinguishing game compared to it.
Yeah, and that's probably pretty accurate. It just, in my head, I was curious if there was, maybe at the time, but it would probably only be real enthusiasts about those arcade games who would be excited about those changes anyway.
I bet you, every arcade around the block had like a game like this.
Right.
This
it
one
wouldn't
in
make much sense for
wasn't like the one.
Exactly, as exemplified by the fact that I had no idea, hadn't heard of this at all until we started doing this podcast.
I know, that's true with like 90% of these games for me.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So back to the ratings that I had for it. For relevance, I gave it a 1 out of 10. It's just a Pong clone among many, many Pong clones. Slightly differentiated because it's hockey, but nothing grand or incredibly impressive to differentiate it. And with all those, that gave me an overall rating of 1.5 out of 10 for it. Basically just the same things that I mentioned for it. It has a couple differentiating things, but it doesn't have the name recognition and nostalgia of Pong. So rating it today for going back and playing it, I think I'd probably just go play Pong if I wanted to play something like it.
Yeah, fair.
And another thing that came up when I was thinking about these is I wonder if Atari, having the enduring legacy that it did, is really one of the things that helped Pong be kind of the symbolic paddle and ball game in everyone's mind, because I don't know anything about Ramtech, and by proxy don't know anything about hockey either.
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned it before, but like during this time, it wasn't just like Pong as a one-hit wonder. Like Atari kept like every game was like amazing, one of its kind, unique, you know. So they definitely built their reputation by hand over this time.
It probably really helped us when we're thinking about it. Like, oh yeah, of course Pong is the popular one, because Atari, they also made this and that and that and that.
Right. One question for you, Wes.
Oh yeah, go for it.
You mentioned you have to hit it into a goal. Was that the full side of the screen? Because I've seen some that they're just like certain sections, or
yeah. So that's an important point that I forgot to touch on. It is just a smaller section of the middle of the screen.
Okay.
So it is in that way a little bit more difficult than Pong too, because it's not just getting it past the opponent's paddles, but also only a subset of the vertical parts of the screen.
I guess it would bounce back if it hit.
Yeah, all the walls did the same thing as the paddles, basically, where it would just ricochet off.
Okay. But could it ricochet off the walls in variable speed? Do you know? That'd be interesting.
I did notice once where the speed was faster after being hit by a paddle and slowed after hitting a wall.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure. I'm not positive. So yeah, I think the walls could change the speed, but I don't know if they could only slow it down or if they could speed it up or what.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so little things looking back at it that do make it interesting and a little bit different.
I'm glad that one is a little bit different, because all these next ones aren't. I'm going to talk about. So there's a lot of games that are, I don't want to say direct copies of hockey by Ramtech, but they're extremely similar and all came out around the same time in late 73. So let me go through them. First, we got Super Soccer by Allied Leisure. We've got Hockey by Volley, which was a subsidiary of Ramtech. So they made 2 hockey games, which is interesting. There's Hockey TV, which is by Sega. There's Soccer by Ramtech. Olympic TV Hockey by Chicago Coin. Pro Hockey by Tatio. Olympic TV Football by Chicago Coin. And Davis Cup by Tatio. So this was having the multiple paddles and like the smaller goal was like a very common thing, especially in hockey and soccer games, it seemed.
Yeah, I guess it's probably pretty natural when you're like, all right, we got Pong. We don't want to do something different than Pong, but different enough.
Yeah. They're like, well, we can't make a one paddle or we're just blatantly ripping off Atari, so what are we going to do?
Yeah, just throw some extra paddles on there.
Yeah, interestingly enough,
they did change it to a different sport.
Yeah, they did, but I think it's interesting that Atari isn't on this list. I feel like it would have been easier for them to just add a couple paddles, but at least in 73 they didn't.
So I guess we'll have to see if something comes up later that's kind of their entry into that series.
Yep, who knows, not me.
So next up we have one called Lunar Landing that came out sometime in 73. And this one is a recreation of a lunar lander by Jack Burness, and it was on the DEC graphics terminal. And it was the first version of it to have graphics, but we couldn't find an emulation to take a look at it.
Yeah. I was looking this up, and I was trying to find an emulation for it because it sounded cool. We've talked about Lunar Lander before as a honorable mention, which is kind of like this game where you try to land a probe on the moon or something.
Right.
And I've seen like pictures of this, and it looked kind of cool, but I found a website that was like, we've recreated this old game as an iOS app. And I was like, really? And I go to the iOS app, and it's like, definitely not the game.
Basically Flappy Bird.
Yeah, it was like, yeah. And I was like, wow, way to just like steal this name and try to make money from it.
Yikes.
Yeah, so it's not on iOS, fellas. Don't go there. Our next game is one that I got to rate. It's called Empire, which, if you've been following, we've already talked about Empire a little bit, but it's a new version made by a new person. This one is kind of has a complicated release schedule because it was originally released in the spring of 73. It was then rewritten in the fall of 73 and then again in the winter of 73.
Wow.
So there's a couple iterations, and of those games, version 2 is the one I played. Version 3 got canned at some point, and we're going to talk about a version 4 that comes like next year or the year after. I can't remember. 1 and 2 are like their own thing. That was more like of a space strategy game, and then like 3 and 4 were more based on combat. So to this day, they're both kind of separated and considered like almost two different games.
Interesting.
Yeah, so even though Empire 3 came out in 73, we won't talk about it until Empire 4. It makes sense to play it then. It's basically the same game. So right. I played Empire 2, which is more the space strategy one. And I had this... I gotta tell you about trying to play this game, Wes. Basically, there's a website called Cyber.1. It's like a closed community I had to like apply to and then wait to hear back from. And to their credit, they got back to me pretty fast and approved me. But I then had to download like a terminal for a Plato. It was released on like the Plato operating system. I'm not sure what that stands for, but it's called Plato with a T. I hope I'm saying that, not Plato. Like the,
yeah, you're saying it right.
Okay. Yeah, so the Plato operating system. And so I had this terminal thing that I booted up, and then you had to like put in your username. They give you like, I think it's called like a group name, and you put that in, and then it's like to continue, you need to hit Shift Control S. And then after that, you put in your password, and after that, it's just like a blank terminal screen.
Weird.
And then I was like, how do I do this? You know, how do I do anything? And I typed like help in, and like nothing worked. Like nothing comes up really. On the email invite they sent me, it said, oh, for your first time, you should type in the words big jump. I'm like, of course, that's natural. So I do that, and it's literally this list of like 300 different programs and commands I can put. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Holy cow.
And it also told me I had a message in my inbox, and I probably spent an hour trying to find what my inbox is, because it's not called inbox. It was called like person box 1 or something. I don't know.
Weird.
But,
okay.
and all the message was like, thank you for signing up.
Right.
And I was like, oh, waste my time. But I eventually found Empire, started it up, realized I had no idea what I was doing, exited out, launched a different program called Empire Help. And then from Empire Help, I realized that was Empire 4. And I needed to actually play a game called Conquest, which is Empire 2. So
right, makes sense.
Yeah. And so I exited that again, played Conquest, which luckily, so it's a multiplayer game, which I don't know if we've played a multiplayer online game before up until this time.
I don't know if we have, no.
But it's a multiplayer online game. Well, actually, I think the last Civilization game was multiplayer, but we weren't able to play it.
Right, okay.
Luckily for me, nobody else was playing. So I was basically able to just do whatever I wanted, which was great because I had no idea what to do. There's like a help screen, and it lists, I want to say 15 different commands, but none of them had any explanation. So for instance, I could give money to research. What does that do? I don't know. What am I researching? I also was on the map I could see my home planet and the sun, and nothing else was on the map. So I spent like an hour trying to figure out, how do I find other players? And I kept trying to do like different things, and eventually one just showed up, like popped out of nowhere, a full planet. And I thought, oh, maybe research is like researching to find planets. And so I just sunk all my money into research, and I found 2 more, and then it stopped, and I didn't find any more.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah. And there's also a bunch of weird stuff, like I would try to move my spaceships to go conquer a planet, and I would set a course and nothing happened. I would just sit there. And eventually I found out I had to put money into I think it was called Movement, and then they moved, and I was like, what is going on? Yeah, so
you just had a bunch of workers on the ships who weren't being paid, and they're like, I'm not flying this ship until someone's paid.
I guess so. I don't know. It was so hard to play. I mean, I also don't really know how the combat works, because I had like 3 ships that each had an army on it, and I would go to one of the planets I found and just declare war and then immediately invade, and then I would just win every time. But if a real person was playing against me, and they had armies on the planet, who would win? Is it just whoever has the more? And if it's the same, would there be losses? I don't know. I never was able to figure it out or experience it. I was hoping at the very beginning of the game I declared war on somebody, assuming I'd find them or something, but the planet never showed up. But I was hoping to find them towards the end, because they would have had some time to do something, I guess, and prep. But they never showed up, even though I had like $500,000 invested into research or whatever. Which again, I still don't really know what it did, but I'm thinking
helped
it has
you find
to do with
planets.
I think it does, but I could be wrong. I don't know. They could just show up out of nowhere for whatever reason
over the course of the game or something.
Yeah.
So is it persistent, or are there matches?
So basically it's persistent, but if someone gets all the planets, it resets.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so it said that the game can take months, because I guess you sit there building up your forces, and there's a lot of like back and forth attacking and stealing bases and stuff that goes on.
Right.
So I could see how it could take a long time, but without anybody to play against, like, I didn't experience that. But yeah, I don't know. It's a complicated one, but it's one that I think had potential. And also, well, let me just get into some of my ratings, because I'll talk about some of the interesting things about it. The graphics are actually kind of like pixelated graphics or something, which is really cool. Like, the spaceship looks like a spaceship, and it's not just made out of an S or something,
Right.
There's like an actual drawn icon or something. I don't know how it does it, and each planet looked like a planet. It was like a sphere that had a bunch of lines through it to make it look like there was continents and stuff. So
wow.
I think art-wise it looked pretty nice. So for that reason, I gave the graphics like 2.5 out of 10. Also, I think the game had 8 planets, and each one could be a human player, assuming that nobody owned them, like more than one at the beginning. So each planet had a race on it, which they're all Star Trek themed, by the way. I was the Romulans. And each planet's ships have their own icon, so you can tell just by the icons what ships are coming, which is pretty cool. So
okay, neat.
Yeah, so I gave the graphics 2.5 out of 10. For gameplay, I gave it a 2 out of 10. I mean, I think there's some interesting things. You can give money to allies. You can obviously play multiplayer matches of, I guess, 8 people at a time, and you can build armies, send spies, which checks the army strength of a planet you're going to. You can build transports and ships to fly on. I don't know if there's spaceship battles. I never encountered one, but that would be interesting. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of cool stuff, because there's some like diplomacy, there's some spy stuff, there's some attacking and action things going on. So I think there's a lot there, but obviously getting into the game is a nightmare. There's no help, there's no instructions. Weirdly enough, there's a help screen, and it just lists the commands with no descriptions, basically. But on the help screen, it says, hit the help button for a tutorial on how to play this game. And the help button just brings up that menu and closes it, so I have no idea. Yeah, so for gameplay, I gave it 2 out of 10. For sound, there was no sound, so 0. And for relevance, I gave it a 7 out of 10, because...
Oh, wow.
I know, well, this is version 2 that I played of at least 4, but I know it goes up to 5. It's a Star Trek game, which was really popular at the time. It's probably the first multiplayer computer game that we've played. So... yeah, I thought I should rate it pretty highly, and because of that, I gave it a 3 out of 10 overall. Pretty good game, but super complicated. But I can see people like every Saturday night going home and playing this on their, microcomputer or whatever, against your
Right, yeah.
buddies. I don't know how many different strategies there really are, but it reminded me of some sort of 4X game, and I like that.
I was going to say, I don't know how many of the X's it has, but it sounds like it's at least getting pretty close.
Yeah. I'm so bad with remembering what all the X's are.
I'm just going to embarrass myself if I try to list them all right now. So we'll just pretend that we know. And,
we got that.
Yeah. Exploitation. I know that.
Yeah. That's all we need.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So
I think with that, we're going to move into our Magnavox Odyssey games. And before we get into them, I want to talk about real quickly the Magnavox released internationally this year. For the fall holiday cycle, they started selling the console in Europe and I think also in South America. So that was kind of like the big push for this year and why there's more games that have come out. But all the launch lineup games for the international version were the same except for one, which is the one you're going to be talking about, Wes.
Yeah. So this one is soccer. And the reason this one's different is it replaced football in the original release of the Odyssey.
Because nobody knows football outside the US.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this one did particularly well, but I'm sure it would have done much, much worse if it had been football releasing in Britain.
Yeah.
Or they'd be confused about, especially when I was looking back at how that one was played and the complex rule sets and cards and everything else. I think that would have been a mess for anyone trying to learn who didn't know football in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
But so for this one, as Ben mentioned, it's a Magnavox Odyssey game. And as far as I could find, it didn't seem like this one had those complex rules or cards. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Nope,
but
it was just like normal.
Yeah, it seemed like this one was sort of just a Pong-like game, but on the Magnavox Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
And the main difference, of course, being the Odyssey, is that it had an overlay that you put on top of the TV. And this one had a soccer field that actually had some players on it, in contrast to the football one, which was just a blank football field, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And for the gameplay of this, it was kind of weird going back and playing an Odyssey game after we've been looking at all these arcade games. I booted up the emulator and remembered that it's just two big squares, one little square, and then this image plastered on top of it.
Yeah.
And basically you just hit the ball back and forth. You can only score if you get in the goal that's drawn on the overlay. But since it's the Odyssey, I'm pretty sure that's all being kept track of by the players. And it's not actually saying, okay, you scored. If it goes off the screen outside the goal, I think you still have to reset the ball anyway, but it just wouldn't count as a goal.
Yeah.
And I did find one mention, but there wasn't any citation for it, so I don't know if it's accurate, saying that you could play it with sort of like soccer rules of like, can only score after you've done this certain thing. But I'm not too sure if that was someone interpreting it afterwards. It basically looked like it was just Pong with the soccer theme kind of thrown on top of it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I got a weird, even though I only played this like a couple weeks ago, weird nostalgia for the Odyssey when I started playing it.
Oh, you did?
Seeing that chunky graphics on the overlay, and just the fact that it's hilariously simple. And I love that they just were like, what if we put these plastic things on the TV to make it look cooler?
Yeah.
And I realized the other reason I was kind of having trouble thinking, like, why is this so, to be a little bit mean, bad compared to what we've been playing? And it's still the first home system, and probably the only home system at the time still, right? Or at least maybe not right then, but yeah.
We'll talk about it. We got another one later in this episode. I'm not quite sure the release dates, but
Gotcha. But still, this was just another version of the Odyssey, which was the first one. So it's got to kind of treat them on different levels of, a lot of the ones we've been looking at are either computer or arcade cabinets, but this one was on a home system. Mm-hmm. And so for the ratings, I gave it a 1 out of 10 for graphics. It's an Odyssey game. I mean, you kind of get what you get, but I'm happy that this at least had soccer players on it and it wasn't just a blank soccer field. I guess it depends on what you prefer, whether you'd like to actually see where your ball is going or not, or if you like the art of the soccer players, but I kind of preferred it with the players on it. For sound, 0 out of 10. Wasn't anything on the Odyssey. Gameplay, it seemed kind of weird. Like they were trying to emulate Pong, and even though all the Odyssey games were a little overly complex, I felt like that's kind of what gave it its identity.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that this didn't have like all those extra rules and like a board game that you play on the side seemed a little weird for an Odyssey game. And like, even though some of the other ones were too complex, it almost seemed a little too simple. I might be overthinking it, but that was my impression when I was going back and playing it.
At least in the context of it being released in 1973, like late 73.
Right, yeah.
Because, I mean, by this time they've already had like the light gun and stuff, you know, like I feel like they could have maybe done more if they wanted to.
Right, yeah, and it made it a bit more interesting because like they also had Haunted House, which whether or not that was a great game, it would at least had like a bunch of stuff that was really different for the time.
Yeah.
And for relevance, I gave it a 2 out of 10. I think it's kind of noteworthy to see that Magnavox was doing a international release, and they were smart enough to at least keep their audience in mind and say, hey, we should really make that soccer instead of releasing football over there.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't think it's too relevant. So overall, I just gave it a 1 out of 10. I said it has quaint Odyssey charm, which might be a little too flattering, but no, it was also
some charm.
It does. I'm growing to like the Odyssey, but that being said, I'm not gonna miss it too much once we're passed on to other games.
Yeah.
And it's also a nice break from just the pure straight up arcade cabinet Pong clone. This is at least like the Odyssey trying to do Pong clone.
Which is weird because Pong tried to do like a clone of the Odyssey.
Yeah.
So it's come from
so it's hard to know what was going through the company. The timing makes it seem like it's a Pong clone. It's hard to say who. Yeah. I mean, it could just be the Odyssey doing their own thing again.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I wanted to say quickly about this one is I think an honorable mention from before was hockey on the Odyssey. And I don't think this is different than it. Because for our notes on that one, I just have table tennis, but ball needs to go into goal. So I think they were basically the same game, but I thought it was interesting still how they were like, you know, they just wanted soccer, I feel like. And they're like, what are we going to do? Let's just do this. Because soccer is going to sell, you know?
Right.
Part of me feels like that's what was
you're right. I think those two games, the overlay is the only thing that's different.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, so soccer.
Yeah, well, and also one thing I know we wanted to touch on is just that the AI in the emulator actually made it it's a cool idea and it made it easier for us to experience it, because otherwise we wouldn't really have any idea what this game was like to play. Yeah. And I had mentioned in a previous episode that the AI was basically impossible to beat and was kind of pointless. But little did I know, I overlooked there were difficulty settings in the AI.
I mean, I overlooked them too, so they weren't like front and center.
Yeah, unless they were only in soccer and not in the other one for whatever reason. But either way, it makes it so you actually can beat it. Depending on the setting, it might make it so you can't lose, but at least gives you some variability. It's nice to see that whoever put the effort into making this made it so that you could have a varied experience and kind of, as a single player, get the idea of what it was like to actually play these games.
Yeah, which is cool. And by the way, we should mention that another big distinguishing factor of soccer compared to like Pong is Pong, you're not the one controlling the ball, whereas in the Odyssey stuff, you've got your English knob or whatever, that's the one that's moving it. So
yeah, and you're still it goes straight back and forth unless you do anything to change it.
Yeah, so it doesn't have
kind of like angle of impact.
Exactly.
Because I don't know if the Pong exactly does that, but it at least simulates it.
Yeah. So very interesting. Makes it a different experience, I would say, but still similar.
Yeah, and what you kind of expect from an Odyssey game.
Yeah. So I think we should move on. What do you feel?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So next we've got basketball from the Odyssey. This was a really weird one for me because I'm a pretty big fan of basketball. I played it in like middle school, high school, and the overlay just like drives me nuts because basically the court is set up like on the left hand side with a hoop in the top and the bottom, or yeah, I'm sorry, it's set up on the right hand side with a hoop at the top and the bottom, and then the left hand side is a wall, and you dribble against the wall to the left, and then
Weird.
you try to shoot it around your opponent into the goal on the right, which is facing not the right direction. It just looks really weird. But yeah, it's kind of complicated. It seems really button mashy because every time anybody touches the ball, that person gets control of the English, but they can only control the English on the ricochet after it hits the wall. And if someone's like right beside the wall, they'll just get it back. So it seems like really weird.
Huh. Yeah.
I didn't feel the need to review it, and the overlay made me mad. So
That's enough reason.
Mention. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next one that we have in honorable mention is Brainwave, and this was the board game section of it was both players had to draw different directional pieces, and they had to build a path to get to the other side of the game board. And the video game part of it was guessing different angles and shooting a shot at the other player to give you points to then get more tiles.
Yeah.
So this one sounds like it had some interesting stuff going on, but another one that we weren't able to find any way to play it.
Yeah, and that one I felt was kind of weird because it seemed kind of random. I mean, it was kind of like this weird deck drawing game, or what's like haunted house on the hill where it's kind of like the game board expands as you draw the cards. I'm sure it's called something, but
oh yeah, because it's not deck building. I can't think of the term off the top of my head.
Yeah, like board game building, but the board's on the screen. Yeah. But that meant that you could just like really get wrecked if you drew them wrong, or
right.
I don't know.
You gotta just get steamrolled if you just draw the wrong cards.
Yeah, it felt like very kind of RNG heavy. So
yeah.
Whereas the next one, I guess, is the one that I played, and it's maybe more skill based. The game is called W.I.N, and basically there's an overlay on the screen that's just a bunch of different shapes and letters and numbers, all kind of randomly sorted in a grid. And in the middle is a place for you to start as the square. And somebody, I think player 2 hits like their reset button and your square disappears, but it still remembers where your square is. And then you try to move the invisible square to the shape or letter or whatever that you're trying to get to, and then turn it on, and whatever it lands on is whatever shape that everybody gets to pick. So at the beginning of the game, everybody would like draw a card, and it would have like a completed shape with multiple shapes on it, or like a full word with multiple letters, or a full like math equation with multiple numbers. So it's basically whoever could get all the shapes or letters or numbers on their card the first would win. This was one that there's no emulation for it, so I couldn't play it myself, but I found a great video on YouTube of 4 college level people playing this game from beginning to end, which was kind of interesting on the original console. So that was pretty cool. And I think they're from Pittsburgh, which we're in Pennsylvania, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, representing.
Go Pittsburgh. I don't know what you're doing with the Odyssey over there, but they're playing W.I.N, apparently. But yeah, so I thought this one was really kind of weird because I guess there's some skill in knowing exactly how far you're moving the invisible square on the screen.
Right.
But it's also invisible. So it's really, really hard. And from watching normal people play the game, it seemed pretty like just random. Right. They'd be kind of in the same general area, but they'd often overshoot or not be close or just be one tile away. And definitely felt like there were times in the video where everybody just needed a single letter, and just getting the exact one that you need is like really hard. So it seemed like it could get frustrating after a while.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the overlay I didn't think was that nice. I just gave it a 1 out of 10. I mean, it's just like a grid, like a white grid with triangles, half circles, like letters and numbers on it. And this weird like part in the middle where you start, which almost looked like a graveyard or something. I don't really know what it was supposed to be, but that was there. And it's weird. Player 1 is the only one that could move and like extinguish, right? Which means that every player, it was like a 4-player game. Every player would have to pass the controller to the next person to play.
Oh, these Odyssey games, man.
I know. So I thought the gameplay was just a 1 out of 10. I don't think it's very good. It seems like invisible bingo. You're just like hoping it lands on your card. Right. If somebody else lands on your shape, by the way, you still get it. So I guess there was some sort of, I'm not going to go for this because, I might accidentally get my enemy's thing. But there was only one of each letter, number, or shape on the map. So if that's the one you needed, you had to go for it. I feel like it would have been a lot better if there were like 2 or 3 all sort of mixed around, so that if you knew your opponent needed the letter I, you could like hopefully go for one that was further away from an I. But if it's right beside, it's right beside. So I don't know. I didn't think it was a very good game. For sound, it's the Odyssey, so no sound. And for relevance, I gave it a 3 out of 10. Definitely below average. I mean, this game was released separately. All these games, other than soccer, by the way, that we're going to talk about today, have been released separately sometime in 1973. So, people went off and bought it just for it. These people in Pittsburgh did. So I guess it was at least somewhat interesting to the general populace, but not to me. So overall, I gave it 1.25 out of 10. It's not good. I mean, to be fair, the people in the video seem to be having a good time, but I wasn't having the best of time watching them play. So nothing against them.
Maybe it's like watching a real horrible movie or something, right? It's kind of the train wreck's part of what makes it fun.
It wasn't a train wreck. It was more like watching a group of people really love watching paint dry. And it's like, they're having a ball, but I'm not having a great time.
That's a fantastic description.
Yeah. They're like having a party, and I'm just like, okay.
Right.
Apparently, the YouTube channel, I watched a couple other videos, and there was like a Magnavox Odyssey conference that they held, and it was like lit. It was like a party in there. And I'm like, who are all these people going to this?
Hardcore Magnavox Odyssey supporters.
I know. So maybe we got to get down to Pittsburgh sometime, Wes. And then we got only one other game. The very last game for the Magnavox Odyssey ever is Interplanetary Voyage, which is actually sounds pretty cool.
It does sound cool, yeah.
And I have to say the box art for this one was like pretty legit. So they did a good job with this one, I think. But this one was kind of interesting because it's really 2 games. The overlay was the same, and the squares and how they interacted were the same. But you could play one game where it was like a trivia game, and you kind of had to answer a question about the universe because it was like a solar system map, not to scale because it was like square. But you kind of had to answer like a trivia question about some planet, and then you would play the actual game to see if you got a point for answering the trivia question right. And so the actual game is kind of interesting. This game came with its own cartridge, which the cartridge influenced the physics of how the Odyssey works. So this time when you played the Odyssey, if you just told the square to go over a little bit, it would like slide as if it were on ice, or I guess it's supposed to be in space. So it kind of float along the screen forever. It would slow down a lot, but I don't think it ever stopped. It would always move until it left the screen. And your goal was to kind of, at least when I played it, if I tried to move it too much, it would just fling off like really fast. So you kind of just bumped it to change direction, and you kind of wanted to get to a certain amount of planets within a certain amount of bumps. So like, let's say you wanted to hit like Jupiter, which was on the far left, and then Mars, which was back on the far right. You'd have to like, if you were starting from the left, you would like go, if you're starting on the right, you would like go to the left, and then hit Jupiter, and you like bounce down, bounce to the right, hopefully so that it just sort of slides into Mars perfectly,
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a different game from any other Odyssey game, which made it kind of interesting. But I don't think it was a great game or anything. I didn't think it was worth talking about other than giving an honorable mention, because you're basically just like bumping the sliding thing into wherever you wanted to go, and it would often just fly off the screen because there was no stopping. So
Right.
yeah, I thought it was interesting, but maybe not. And there's also no emulation for this one, so the best I could do was just watch videos, and I don't think people in some of the videos I've seen played it correctly, so we just had to kind of give it an honorable mention. But it's probably a cool one, and I'm glad it's the last Odyssey game because it's a cool one.
A good way to end off the Odyssey for now. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we leave the Odyssey, Wes, do you have any final thoughts on the first home console?
I think whether I like all the games or not, which I'll tell you, overall I kind of don't. I think it's super interesting, and I would even dare say innovative to just be like, our home system can't do that much. What can we do to make it more interesting? And to make it half board game, half video game, throw those plastic overlays up there. It's really, did a good job of making something out of a piece of hardware that couldn't do all that much.
Yeah. And I can just tell you, since I have already researched 1974 and even a bit into 75, the types of consoles that come out after the Odyssey are like nowhere near as cool, in my opinion. They don't use overlays. They don't have backgrounds. They're basically Pong clones, and the Odyssey was like its own thing. I feel like it. I mean, it had the cards, it had the light gun. There was just so much more to it.
Yeah, like brand and idea that for everything else we're seeing at the time just seems totally different.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like a premium home experience at this time, and even some of the consoles that will come later, I don't think match it, in my opinion.
Right.
But yeah, I'm sad to see it go, but they will be back. Philips and Magnavox will produce some other things, so we'll definitely check it out. But sad to see the Odyssey go, but it's time to say goodbye.
Farewell, Odyssey. And so I guess with that, should we move on to the rest of the ones we have to mention today?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so this next one is called Wimbledon, and it was made by Nutting Associates in December of 1973. And it's the first color game that's released that's actually fully released, right? Am I getting that part of it right?
Yeah.
And it's a Pong's doubles clone that had a green and yellow background to simulate a tennis court and different colored paddles for the 4 players.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, crazy to see color at this time when we haven't really seen too much of that, or any really.
I mean, we just saw Color Gotcha, which they only released like 10 games or something last time. But this is like, I think they sold a couple thousand, or at least...
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like a phenomenal selling game, but it was like pretty good. And it's all in color, so...
There you go. That's
unlike
crazy.
The next one that I'm going to talk about, which is called Coupe Davis, which is just a France release of Pong doubles by Atari. But they did open like a Atari France studio or something, so it's interesting that Atari is getting bigger and doing things overseas now. So I wanted to mention it, but it's just Pong doubles.
Right.
Black and white.
But the next one we get into, at least in concept, is a little bit more interesting. And this one's Watergate Caper by Nutting Associates. And it's a code-breaking game. It's hard to tell exactly what it was, but it looks like it was possibly electromechanical. And I'm not sure if it was ever actually sold. But interesting, at least for the subject matter of, we looked up, and this is kind of still while the Watergate stuff is going on, but this is just a game about Watergate.
Yeah, cashing in on what's going on in the world.
You know the people are going to eat it up because it's what's on the news.
Oh yeah.
And then the next one is another Nutting Associates game called Missile Radar. And this one, you shoot missiles before they hit the ground. Another one that I'm not sure if it's sold, but we couldn't find any current photos, video, or emulation so that we could get a better look at it.
Yeah, basically for those past 2 games, we only found like a flyer. And I think on those flyers, it wasn't even a real picture. It was like a drawing or something.
Right, like some, promo kind of thing.
Like, I don't know if we should include this, but at the end of the day, I was like, we'll at least say that they might have existed. They sound like they would have been cool.
Yeah, and another entry or if not entry, another idea by Nutting Associates, who we've been seeing through this history.
Yeah, they've been trying to keep up. And for our last sort of game that we're going to talk about today, I want to tell you guys about the Telematch de Panoramic and the Overcow, which were both Odyssey ripoffs in 1973, one made in Spain and one made in Argentina. But basically, these are straight ripoffs. So, like, someone took the Odyssey and, like, made a new, like, cabinet for it or whatever and just sold it again for the most part. So I kind of didn't know if I wanted to even include them, but they're basically, they have, both of them weren't as advanced as the Odyssey. I'm not sure exactly how the overlays worked, or even if they had overlays, they might have just been the background games.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, they weren't like at the Odyssey standard. But Telematch, which I think was the Argentinian one, could play a soccer variant where you had to hit a ball into a hole behind the opponent's paddle. So it was kind of like, it was a new game for home consoles, but it was basically like the hockey of the Odyssey, but with a physical boundary in the back, and you had to put it through the hole of the physical boundary. So
right. So a little bit different, but
a little bit different, but I mean, it was still basically running from the Odyssey hardware. So
right.
It was interesting. I wanted to mention them because they were existing during this time as other home consoles, but they're basically just the Odyssey released in other countries for the most part. So not really anything new. And with that, we're done with 1973.
Wow. And it's been a long and interesting journey. Sad to say goodbye to the Odyssey, and a lot of crazy stuff along the way.
Yeah. I want to mention, starting next episode, we're going to rename the episodes a little bit differently with the date out in front, and then like some special topic for each episode that will tell you something that happened that year that we're going to talk about. So as a preview for next episode, we're going to be talking about 1974 early video games, including one that had the first human sprites ever to be released. So that'll be very exciting. And I hope you guys will like that change.
Yeah, it should make it easier for you to either go by year or subject to find what you're really interested in looking up and getting some more information on.
Right, because I understand, like, if you want to look about Space Race, that episode's just called the Pong Era Part 1, and that might not be the easiest to figure out what games are with which episode. So hopefully this will be a little bit easier, at least give you the highlights in the title. And I'm not sure how many episodes of 74 there will be, but there will be a couple. So I think 1974 has the most games that I've ever kind of had to research all put together. So it's going to be a very exciting year. I hope you guys are excited to be with us for this journey. Thanks for listening. Do you have anything else to say, Wes?
Nothing other than can't wait to get into 74 and see y'all next time.
See you next time.
We shall, and then just straight into the, yeah, I like that. Do that.